what are certain strategies that we could use? I remember in one of the other interviews that I watched of yours, you were saying ki, and Abhi, earlier also you said that a lot of these calls for violence against non-Muslim Kashmiris used to come from they used to go for their Friday prayers, and then in there the Maulvis would say, "Acha, this is your duty of jihad. This is your religious duty. This is what you have to do." And loudspeakers are announcing Hindus get out and things like that. So I feel like that is a major area which needs to be addressed. Like what is being taught to the common Kashmiri when they go to like a madrasa or when they go to like a masjid? What are their Maulvis teaching them? That I feel like could be one. It is an extreme example, but there's an example of what France has done after the recent spate of attacks, where they've said, look, we have no problems if you want to teach your religious theory in the madrasas and the masjids, but you have to get trained in France, and you have to make sure that you get certified in France. If you get certified,
Exactly.
because a lot of these people, what they do, they go train in like Saudi, they go train in like Algeria, and then they come back to France, and then they're teaching all this nonsense to French Muslims. Do you think, I know it is going to be a crazy unpopular step, people are going to lose their minds, but do you think that kind of a step might be necessary to tackle radicalization in Kashmir?
Firstly, you mentioned Saudi interestingly, but even Saudi has countered radicalization. You
अपने
know,
देश में तो कर ही रहे हैं, yeah.
yeah, so you see, Tablighi Jamaat, for instance, is banned as a terrorist organization by Saudi. But in India,
Uh,
when the entire
I have
COVID
something
fiasco
to
happened, yeah, please,
sorry.
please
I
go
had
ahead.
something to add to that. Please continue about Tablighi Jamaat. I have something to say, but
So,
continue, please. You were saying.
so what happened was that in India, these so-called people said that please apologize to Tablighi Jamaat.
Yeah.
Indians were not justified in questioning Tablighi Jamaat and their event when the COVID was spreading like wildfire across India. So
Yeah.
I would say today that India needs to take a leaf out of what the Saudi is doing, what UAE is doing, and what Israel is doing.
Hmm.
You need to have a conversation with all the preachers in Kashmir, with
Hmm.
Maulvis, that again, under the Quran, you have to give positive teachings. You are the godly figure there in the village. Every Friday or every other day, you teach, you pray, but you teach the positive aspects. And the security agencies need to keep a very close watch on this,
Hmm.
because you cannot tolerate Indian constitution, Indian democracy, Indian sovereignty being
Hmm.
questioned by these people. Of course, you have grievances with the government. You do that. You protest against it. India is a free country, and that's what I told the government as well, that after 370 abrogation, if there are peaceful protests that are organized, we have a large heart and there should be protests.
Yeah.
That's what dissent is all about. But when it comes to abusing your constitution, your parliament, your government, and the way separatists have handled over the last 3 decades, it is not going to work. So, but the Indian security agencies are also in such a way not either not realizing or not taking those steps right now against radicalization, because
Hmm.
radicalization poses a huge, huge challenge. I'll tell you, for example, although it's not directly linked to radicalization, a
Yeah.
few weeks back, I got at least, I think, 5 or 6 emails from an account called ISIS Kashmir. And they said that, if you come to Kashmir, you will be
Yeah.
beheaded, you will be killed, and we know your present location, and we will eliminate you. Don't hide in Delhi. We know we have been tracking you very closely.
Wow.
So once the agencies, the NIA and the intelligence agencies investigated this, they got the IP address and they got the link of Karachi, a man sitting in Karachi who is sending an email from an account created in the name of ISIS Kashmir. So it was
Wow.
not ISIS, it was Pakistan Army and the ISI and their PSYOPs who
Hmm.
wanted to threaten me, cricketer Gautam Gambhir, and a couple of other journalists from Pakistan. So
Wow.
this is what Pakistani deep state really wants, to create some kind of a fear psychosis. So there is this external element of Pakistan which is failing again, and there is radicalization which is being curbed. Terrorism is being
Hmm.
curbed, but a lot needs to be done with radicalization as well, because if we don't, it will be, as I said, a vicious cycle that will continue. So the
Yeah.
intelligence agencies and the security forces on ground, and I again salute the JNK police, the valor, the courage, the commitment that the JNK
Yeah.
police has shown over the last many years is immense. Even though Indian Army is there, CRPF is there, and salute to them as well. But JNK police is one of the best counter-terror forces in the country. The way they are
Hmm.
trained, the way they gather their own intelligence, and 95% or more of them are Kashmiri Muslims.
Wow.
So, yeah, so they are doing an immense job. They're doing a great job, and they're perhaps much more patriotic than you and me. So because the circumstances under which they are working, so
Yeah.
they are treated as you're an Indian traitor if you join the Indian police or security agencies. So.
Yeah.
But a lot needs to be done on radicalization fronts as well, because in the past we've seen many of the lower ranks of the police being brainwashed and then joining the terror ranks. So that we also looked into.
And the third piece of the puzzle here is also the political aspect. There's the radicalization aspect. There's obviously the security aspect, and there's also the political aspect because ठीक है, you abrogated Jammu and Kashmir, you made it a union territory for the time being, but the Modi government has said on more than one occasion that they want to restore statehood to Jammu and Kashmir again. So if you want to do that, there's a problem that the political players in Jammu and Kashmir are more or less the same sort of political players that wanted to maintain the status quo of Article 370, that never made any attempts to intervene when Kashmiri Hindus were being driven out, that never made any attempts to once again bring back the Kashmiri Hindus to the Kashmir Valley in the last 30 years. अभी आर्टिकल 370 एब्रोगेट हो गया तो बोल रहे हमारे भाई चले गए, हमको बड़ा दुख हो रहा है, प्लीज यार रहने दो 30 साल बहुत टाइम हो गया. But you have these are the same players that are still available, National Conference PDP type people who were also, many people within those parties were also sympathetic to those bloody Gilani types. So if you want to restore statehood to Jammu and Kashmir, but you have the same players that are available there, won't you go back to the the old situation again if you restore statehood? So how do you solve that problem? Do you have to sort of create or nurture a cadre of sort of more pro-India politicians, or nurture a cadre of more pro-India parties? How does that work?
In the local people in Kashmir, there's an exhaustion that is set in. There is a fatigue factor. And they are equally terrified or equally abusive of the National Conference and the PDP, or even to a certain extent, national political parties like Congress and BJP. So they are tired with the so-called political system because it hasn't been able to end this cycle of death, this cycle of terrorism. Because it's not just terrorism. There are many unfortunate events that happen as a result of terrorism, as a byproduct. The hartals that happen, the shutdown that happens, the curfew that happens, and the economic livelihood of the people suffers, because tourism is a massive industry there. And you'll be surprised, Sham, that over the last 2 years, the kind of tourism that we have seen in Kashmir has not been seen in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So it's massive. As I said, I was there in July and I saw massive, traffic jam at the Dal Gate in the heart of Shri.
That's nice.
I mean, there's a huge tourist rush going to Pahalgam and Gulmarg. And domestic tourists. So, politically, if you ask me, not as a journalist, as a Kashmiri who has been an observer of things in Kashmir, I believe election should not happen. I believe that at least for next 2 to 3 years, if not more, election should not happen. The governor's rule should continue. And as I touched upon the fatigue factor and exhaustion, the common people are happy with the governor staying there because they do not feel that the PDP is, doing corrupt practices and amassing wealth or helping only their own people. They are not seeing National Conference doing the same. They are not seeing BJP and Congress doing the same. The politics is working side by side. There are statements, there are protests, there are angry reactions on social media, but the development and eradicating the corrupt systems and the practices of the past, it should be the main priority of the government. As I said, the conflict industry that's set in, there are thousands of government employees who have been hired by the J&K government in different regimes who do not qualify for those positions through corrupt practices. They have been there. I mean, there was a situation, there still is a situation where the people thought that, we can enter office in government job at 12 and leave by 4. And you just have to sign and do nothing about it. So that's how the political system, the governance system has suffered over the years. So a lot needs to be changed. So I don't see that BJP will have elections and perhaps with other political parties will form government and things will change drastically. That's not going to happen. Although BJP will try their best that in the next elections, whenever they happen, there is a Hindu chief minister, because till now there hasn't been a Hindu chief minister in Jammu and Kashmir. They would want that to happen. But I personally feel if we have a larger cause here, if we really want to change things in Jammu and Kashmir, then the governor's rule should continue at least for 2 to 3 years. The old practices need to be ended. We need to have a new system in place. Development needs to be pushed in. Investment needs to be pushed in. There need to be more hotels, more hospitals, more education institutions, more hospitals, and other linked offices and factories to be set up there. Because over the last 30 years, not much has been seen. The Omar Abdullahs and the Farooq Abdullahs and the Mehbooba Muftis of the world will
Yeah.
say that we did whatever was possible for development. But once you visit yourself down on ground, you will see the difference between Jammu and let's not talk about Jammu, Kashmir, and Delhi, or for matter any other city.
Yeah.
So a lot can be done. It can be an international tourist destination.
Yeah, and don't you remember, like my dad, his favorite era of Bollywood movies is like the 60s movies, the Shami
Oh yes.
Kapoor type movies. Those were his favorite genre of movies, favorite music from those movies. And I almost feel like we used to sit and watch them all the time when we were kids. I almost feel like half the movies were bloody shot in Kashmir at that time, in the
That's
60s.
true.
So you
That's
had
true.
an entire film industry that was, flooding money into Jammu and Kashmir for filming locations and all that kind of stuff. And because of that, there's another cottage industry जहाँ पर कश्मीर के लोगों को काम मिल रहा है, as spot boys and all kinds of different things. They're getting work. And because of the terror situation, itni buri halat hai, that industry has completely gotten removed. So those
Yeah.
jobs and that a good amount of money that was coming into the economy, that's also gone. And I feel like if the situation improves, I wouldn't be surprised, because I was already hearing right after the abrogation happened, we heard about some plans of some like Karan Johar or somebody trying to buy some property in Kashmir or something like that.
Mhm.
And I wouldn't be surprised if something like that happens again. And if you're a regular Kashmiri who's sick of this cycle of violence and death and terrorism and shutdowns, you would welcome something like this. Ki, हाँ, आओ movie बनाओ यार, मेरे को job मिलेगी, मेरे को क्या तकलीफ है?
You
And
know, Sham,
pre-abrogation investment was also forbidden, right, from outside?
investment,
So
yes,
you're not
because
allowed to buy land.
yeah, you did not get the property right. You did not get the ownership.
Yeah.
You could do that as a partnership with a local Kashmiri or a
Right.
local citizen of there, but you couldn't own land there. Now
Yeah.
that has changed. And the funny aspect, Sham, is since you mentioned shooting and films, of course, I agree that till the 80s, this used to happen,
Yeah.
from Amitabh Bachchan to many others who used to come there regularly, and shooting used to happen. But since last 30 years, cinema halls have been banned in Kashmir. Can you imagine that? I mean, in
That's
Jammu, there are
crazy.
cinema halls, but in Kashmir, cinema halls have been banned.
Yeah.
I mean, the old cinema halls like Shiraz, etc., the buildings are standing there because last time they could have played was in late 70s or early 80s. And after that, nothing. So you have to make a beginning by starting cinema halls in Kashmir. You have to make a beginning by starting art cinema in Kashmir. Because I remember a few years ago when the first
Yeah.
girl band came up from Kashmir,
Oh, that's
there
right.
was a huge protest by radical separatists and
Yeah.
Hurriyat, and we will not let this happen. How can girls sing? How can girls play guitar? I mean,
Yeah.
imagine the kind of narrowness and the Islamist thinking that they have.
Yeah.
So I think the beginning has to be made by opening cinema halls, by making the state, the union territory, and the society more inclusive.
Mm.
Art and cinema to be there, art groups from Delhi and elsewhere to be introduced there, and have mutual, groups, etc. The army, the CRPF, and the local some NGOs are trying that to happen, but it
Yeah.
has to be a demand that has to become from the society itself. So I
Yeah.
see many Kashmiris coming to Delhi and wearing mini skirts and going to cinema halls here,
Yeah.
but the moment they are in Kashmir, they don't do the same.
Yeah.
So they have to have courage. I know it's difficult because when there is a bullet on your head, you can't say much. But
Yeah.
there has to be a collective conscience and the collective voice of Kashmiris that has to change things, and that's how we are seeing flags all across Kashmir today. It's
Yeah.
like a revolution that is taking place.
Do
A
you
tricolor
feel
revolution.
like that's you talk about the flags, and I often wonder, because obviously I'm not Kashmiri, I'm not that connected to the state, but do you feel like that is happening more organically, or do you feel like that's something ki ye government karwa rahi hai, या do you feel it's
नहीं,
more organic?
बिल्कुल नहीं, गवर्नमेंट करा रही है. There's no doubt about that. Army
Hmm.
is doing it, the
Hmm.
government is doing it, but why shouldn't the government do it? I
Yes,
mean,
yes,
the
100%.
question here is that Jammu and Kashmir is an integral part of India, and they are not forcing any Kashmiri to wave the tricolor.
Yeah.
They are having tricolors on government buildings, as it should be. They are having tricolor on the police stations, as it should
Hmm.
be. At public places that are very significant, like I mentioned, the Hari Parvat, which is a very
Hmm.
prominent fort, and there's a temple also there, and there's 100 feet tricolor there. The tricolor near Dal Lake. Similarly, there will be a tricolor now at Lal Chowk,
Yeah.
as it should have been. So, the things that the separatists did not want, the things that separatists had forbidden Kashmiris to do, and that has been encouraged. I mean, the army and the police and the government want to tell the people that you do whatever a common Indian is doing. You seek the rights that the common Indians are seeking, and we will be behind you. So that kind of a support system has to be there, because there's been a lot of fear. I remember Kashmiris calling me and telling me, youth, that we will do whatever is possible, but whenever we do this, the next day we'll be killed. So
Wow.
there has to be some kind of a support structure from
Yeah.
the government, from the security forces as well, and that's what is being given.
Yeah. I think, one of the other things that's important to do is, because this is something you never see, going back to mainstream media very finally, Aditya, if you go to mainstream media, you're never going to hear the voice of a Kashmiri that says, I am better off with India than with Pakistan because I have a future here. I'm considered part of the country here. I'm considered valued here. I want to stay here. This is my country. मैं यहाँ पैदा हुआ हूँ, यहीं मरूंगा. You are not going to hear those kinds of Kashmiri Muslims in the media. You're going to hear the kind of Kashmiri Muslims who are like, "Arey, mere ko mara ja raha hai," and all that kind of stuff. That's what you're going to hear. And I feel like the other important thing is, for not just for the government, unko to karna hi hai, but for media, for commentators, all those kinds of people, to reach out to those voices, reach out to Kashmiri Muslim voices, along with other Kashmiri voices as well, but Kashmiri Muslim voices too, that are not necessarily bought into this whole separatist narrative, that don't consider themselves to be not a part of India. After speaking to people like Ahmed, speaking to people like Khalid Beg, Amana Ansari, who run a great show on YouTube, they may have their own issues with India and the Indian government and how the Indian society operates, but they don't see themselves as victims of India. They see themselves as equal citizens of India. They see themselves as people who have an equal role to play in the future of where India as a nation should go, because they're equal citizens of India. वो Indians ही हैं, यहीं पैदा हुए, यहीं मरेंगे. उनके बच्चे भी यहीं पैदा हुए, यहीं मरेंगे. So it's very important, I feel like, and again, mainstream media is not going to do it. And so I think it's becomes so important for whoever in the media has that kind of courage, and particularly the government, to promote and bring those voices into the mainstream, don't you think?
Firstly, which media is the gateway to what happens in Kashmir? It is the local media.
Yeah.
The local media actually tells the international press or the national press what's happening. Stringers, local reporters, local chief of bureaus or editors. Now look at the hypocrisy. Over the last 30 years, conflict industry was not just for the politicians or the separatists. It was also for the local media. And it's still there. Whenever there is a terrorist attack, whenever there is a huge protest that happens, each clip or each, whatever material is sent out and lakhs are earned out of it. Now, immediately if the conflict ends and nothing happens there continuously, what will happen to the conflict industry? One is this. Secondly, there's a lot of propaganda that continuously happens. The hypocrisy is here that the same journalists who took government benefits, when the NC and the PDP government was there, they took government accommodation, they took government security, they took government money also sometimes in the form that their family members were adjusted in the government job somewhere, or they were given some kind of perks elsewhere, or they were given some kind of an award. The same journalists next day abuse India in international press or elsewhere. So this is a hypocrisy. And the government also either did not know or did deliberately or looked the other way, remained a mute spectator in this entire process. I mean, where else did you see that the government is paying a journalist for abusing their own country?
That's
and
incredible.
This is what happened. And as I said, they are the gateway to what's happening in Kashmir. So it happened on the international media. It's been happening right now, and it will continue to happen until and unless you make them understand that, this is a conflict industry that will not work out. And if you have links with Pakistan, if you have links with separatists, if you are accepting money to abuse the country or spreading propaganda, it's not going to work anymore. So that conflict industry has to be attacked and, cannot survive in any manner.